I'm president of the George Bush Foundation. 5 years ago, President Bush asked me to stand up the George W. Bush Foundation, and I want to give you a brief report on where we are. We have a 25-acre site on the campus of Southern Methodist University, an up-and-coming national university in Dallas, Texas, where we're building the George W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum. It'll be the 13th Presidential Library and Museum in the NARA system. On April 25th of 2013, we'll dedicate this building that will house all the records of the two-term Bush presidency and a museum that will tell the story of the consequential 8 years when he was our leader in the format of decisions, key decisions that he made based upon the principles that guide the work of the Bush Institute. Because we added to the Presidential Library and Museum something unique, which is a policy institute, the George W. Bush Institute, which James Glassman has started up in tremendous fashion. And we're doing work in the areas that he described this morning, including the conference that we're having today. And it's going really well. We published a book in July, The 4% Solution, a copy of which is available to all of you who attended here today. So as you leave, don't forget to get your copy of the book. We've been raising money. I'm happy to say that we have raised enough money to pay for the building, to pay for the startup of the Institute, but we're also continuing to ask people to help us fund the work of the Institute, because it's our hope and President Bush's goal that 20 years from now that the Bush Institute will be a key piece of the conversation on policy for the long term based down in Texas, representing the values that we talked about today at this conference. And I want to thank the sponsors of this conference today, Highland Capital Management, First Trust, and the Illinois Policy Institute that helped make this happen. And I want to introduce the fourth sponsor of the conference today, Byron D. Trott. He's chairman and CEO of BDT Capital Partners, which is a Chicago-based merchant bank that invests in businesses, family-owned businesses, and provides advisory services to them. And I want you to know that the Bush Institute is a family-founded business, and Byron Trott, we're happy to report, has provided us capital, is an investor, and gives us good advice. So I invite to the podium Byron Trott.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. I just say what a great set of discussions we had this morning, and while a little depressing for us in the state of Illinois, I believe it was enlightening nonetheless. Just wanted to give a quick hand to James, Amity, Mark, and the Bush Institute for all their terrific work on taxing growth. I think everybody was paying attention this morning, but that's less tax and more growth, not the reverse. Today I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Mitch Daniels, the 49th governor of Indiana and the author of the best-selling book, Keeping the Republic, Saving America by Trusting Americans. Last week I had the privilege of hosting my firm's first global summit for family-controlled businesses around the world. And one of our sessions was John Huey, the author of the biography of Sam Walton, and Walter Isaacson, the author of the biography of Stephen Jobs. And they compared and contrasted the different men who are completely different from a personal standpoint, but the similar characteristics of leadership and why they were so great. And many of the common characteristics, I'm sure many of you are familiar with: passion, vision, integrity, fortitude, setting high expectations for themselves and those around them, never accepting no as the answer, having the courage to go against conventional wisdom when necessary, and getting a little bit of enjoyment from defying the odds and doing the impossible. When you think about those characteristics, this morning, I think we had the great advantage of some great panels and hearing from several great leaders this morning. How refreshing is Jimmy John? I mean, unbelievable. You get David Booth, Bruce Rauner, men that have built incredible companies, defied all odds, and many others. I accepted the opportunity, which I try to stay below the radar for those of you in Chicago know, and really consider it a privilege to introduce the governor because of my great admiration from a distance and respect for what he has accomplished as a great leader of the state of Indiana since he began his term as governor in 2005. You know, in an era when the country is desperately seeking leaders with sound judgment, decisiveness, vision, Governor Daniels has become the living embodiment of those values. While he had tremendous experience serving as Chief of Staff to Senator Richard Lugar, Senior Advisor to President Ronald Reagan, and Director of the Office of Management and Budget under George W. Bush, I believe it was his private sector experience that provided a solid foundation for facing today's challenges as an effective political leader. Before his service to Indiana, he had a successful career in business, holding numerous top management positions, including his work as president of Eli Lilly's North American pharmaceutical operations, which gave him the grounding in business and skills necessary to effectively lead state government. His record as a two-term governor of Indiana is remarkable. Without increasing taxes, he led Indiana to its first balanced budget in 8 years. He transformed a $700 million deficit into an annual surplus of $370 million. He has presided over record-breaking job growth and investment, including, by the way, we learned this morning that you tried to steal businesses from the state of Illinois. Not so nice, but effective in a free market enterprise system. He paid millions of dollars the state had borrowed from it. He paid back millions of dollars the state had borrowed from its public schools, universities, and local units of government in previous administrations. And today, Indiana has a AAA credit rating, the first in state history, and ranks near the very top of every national ranking of business attractiveness. He has structured deals that even an investment banker would admire greatly. His groundbreaking accomplishments include the 2006 lease of the Indiana Toll Road, the largest privatization of public infrastructure in the United States to date, generating nearly $4 billion for reinvestment. The creation of Healthy Indiana Plan to provide health care coverage for uninsured adults, a sweeping property tax reform in 2008 that resulted in the biggest tax cut in Indiana history, and an emphasis on government efficiency that has led to many of the state agencies of Indiana winning national performance awards. Indiana now has the fewest state employees per capita in the nation and the fewest the state has had since 1975. When Governor Daniels was reelected in 2008 to his second and final term, he received more votes than any candidate for public office in the state's history. Not surprisingly, his second term has been as innovative as his first. In fact, earlier this year, under his guidance, Indiana passed some of the most expansive education reforms in the country. His tenure as one of America's most successful and popular governors sadly comes to an end in January, when his next chapter will be leading Purdue University as its 12th president. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the governor of the state of Indiana.
Thank you. Mr. Trott and Mark, friends of the Bush Institute, neighbors, really grateful for the chance to be here. I can't but reflect that the choice of Illinois for a discussion of successful business growth strategies is an awkward one. I was wondering what the Institute would come up with next, you know, championship baseball seminar at Wrigley Field. Maybe a symposium on ballot integrity down in the 23rd Ward of Chicago. But if your sense of irony is tuned up, you know, you can enjoy the fact that we're here, and I plan to. The topic assigned for the morning is one I obviously have spent a little time thinking about and working on, and I'm eager to reflect on for a few minutes and then take your questions. Like so much in life, it need not be overcomplicated. Occasions like this always put me in mind. My favorite illustrative story goes that you know, University of Chicago Business School reunion, 25th year, the guy who was the valedictorian is sitting down at one end of the bar, and life hadn't worked out just as he thought. He's a third vice president in a regional bank somewhere. And the other end of the bar is the guy who was dead last in the class. He's just been on the cover of Forbes, having sold his third company for $1 billion. And finally, after a couple beers, the valedictorian can't take it anymore, and he goes down the other end and he says, hey, Mitch, you were never that good at this when we were here, and what gives? And Mitch says, you know, Mark, I don't know. Sometimes it just amazes me. I buy these things for $4, I sell them for $6, and that 2% just adds up and adds up and So, you know, sometimes keeping it simple has its virtues. Let me just give you a few thoughts, simple thoughts about what, from both our instinct and our experience, we believe sound policy to be and to not be in the world of states who are trying, as all states do, or say they do, to expand opportunity and hope and prosperity within their boundaries. A short way we like to say it in Indiana is it's about the sandbox. We've said from the beginning we were out to build the best sandbox in America, and believe that people of enterprise would recognize that and would come and pursue their dreams there. Pursuant to that, there's some obvious things we try to do. Some direct things we try to do are to lower the cost of hiring Hoosiers any way we can. So, taxes, we've lowered the corporate tax, we've lowered property taxes, as Byron made mention. We've just abolished or put on a track to phase out the inheritance tax in our state. We have the highest R&D tax credit in the country, recognizing that a state still more manufacturing intensive than any in America needs to diversify and to join as quickly as possible the world of innovative businesses as we are, particularly in the life sciences. It's a small thing, but we hope makes a statement. In Indiana, if you successfully are granted a patent and produce a good or service based on that patent, we won't tax you for the first 5 years, or we'll tax you on a declining scale on the income from it. I can't resist mentioning that our workers' comp is 1/3, last I looked, the rate that you're charging in Illinois, or you're charged as a business. Our unemployment insurance we have reformed, and we're the first state now to be paying back a obligation that built up during the recession. So any way we can, we look simply to make it more affordable to hire one of our fellow citizens to make your next investment in our state. But that's just the beginning. There are so many indirect costs, everyone in the room knows, that governments either purposely or thoughtlessly inflict on those who would like to create more income and wealth for people. Our regulatory philosophy in Indiana, I tried to establish on the very first day, and we have reaffirmed it every day since. My first day in office was very, very busy, starting with an inaugural ceremony and the symbolic delivery of a big set of legislative initiatives to the House, same to the Senate, some executive orders on ethics and striking down collective bargaining by public employees, little things like that. And but I had time in there, I thought, to meet with one set of my new colleagues in state government, my co-workers, as I always call them. And so I selected the Environmental Management Department. And they gathered in a room, or all that could fit in the room, and then there were others on phones and so forth. Large group. Not quite that large today, but still big. And I said to them approximately this. I said, I don't know what you suspect or imagine, but let me just tell you, I don't really know anyone who isn't committed to a cleaner and safer environment. And we don't intend, as far as I know, and 8 years later I can say we didn't, we don't intend to weaken or moderate or relax a single standard for clean water or air or something else. But here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to be quick, consistent, and collaborative, not slow, unpredictable, and punitive. I said, first of all, quick. We're going to measure, folks, on how long it takes to get a permit or an answer. And before long, we're going to be rewarding those people. That doesn't just apply to environment, it applies to 100 other places in state government. But I said, listen, time is money is not a figure of speech. That's a literal business truth. And every day you keep somebody waiting is costing them money, and it's costing somebody an opportunity, possibly, to start a job they don't have today. And I don't want to hear any more of the stories I hear all the time about Inspector A told me to do the following, and as soon as I'd done it, Inspector B came in and said, no, that's not right. Tear it out and do something different. So that's incredibly unfair and abusive. You knock it off. And finally, your job is not to be, some sort of a secret police lurking around hoping somebody violates a rule so you can jump out and whack them. Your job is to visit with, these people are not the enemy. These are your neighbors. If they're not in compliance or headed that direction, tell them what they need to do. Now, if somebody stubbornly refuses to do it or knowingly violates one of our regs, we'll throw the book at them, but there won't be very many of those if you do your job this way. So I take your time with that because we have tried to bring that outlook to bear across state government and reward those who help us pursue it. Incidentally, we're the only state, as far as I know, that pays people on a bell curve. This will seem odd maybe to you, but in government they don't do that. So the person who does the very best job at the end of the year is treated just the same as the person with his feet up reading the sports section. But we've made that reform as well. Now, building a better sandbox, building the most positive business climate involves some action by government too. And Byron mentioned our activity in infrastructure building. I personally believe that this is one of the most useful things that government can do to build the best possible backbone, which means, yes, traditional forms, roads and bridges and rail and transportation facilities, especially if you live in the part of the country we all do. But it means in this age, of course, the backbone of fiber and frequency and those things that enable the new economy. And so we've done a couple things that have led to the biggest building boom in state history. We have a fully funded 10-year plan. We are building projects, including some of the big ones that people said would never, ever happen. I was just at one down by Louisville where people for 43 years, new bridges across the Ohio River have been on the books. And we will now have them built in the next few years. It'll be a tremendous economic growth opportunity in the southern part of our state. Many more examples like that. In the last couple of years in particular, people who hadn't noticed before, I don't know how they missed it, the importance of certainty in a business climate have paid a little more attention to it because we don't have any nationally. But we've thought about that consistently for 8 years, and so when we cut property taxes on business and individuals, as was mentioned, by the way, the average property tax rate in Indiana is 0.79% of the value of a home. I only mention this because it's exactly 5 times that in Illinois. But when we reduced them, we also capped them. And then we constitutionalized the cap, because the history of property taxes in our state is a little volatile. And now people know for certain that their tax rate on their business might reach 3%, maybe, but it won't ever go above it. We likewise have viewed fiscal integrity in state government as a duty. There's a certain moral dimension to it. I always say our position is that we should never take a dollar from a free citizen without a very necessary purpose, and then we better pursue that purpose with all the efficiency we can, or we should never have taken the dollar at all. It's a diminution of that person's freedom. I love to play this little game. I go through high school classrooms, college sometimes, and I'll say, you know, who's got a $5 bill? And some kid will turn one over, and I thank them and stuff it in my pocket and just keep talking, and you get little giggles usually, and I affect to be surprised. And then I make this little explanation, you know, Susan here is $5 less free than she was a minute ago. If she still had that 5, she could decide what to do with it. So you quickly find out nobody's talking to kids like that in schools these days. But fiscal integrity is more than just a fiduciary duty. It also establishes a climate of certainty. And a lot of businesses these days, I'm surprised how many, bring this up when they come to see us. I don't particularly tout AAA credit ratings and a $2 billion plus surplus in the bank and so forth, but they bring it up to us, and I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, you know, if I put this facility in Indiana, I'm less likely to get a rude surprise in year 3 or 5 or 7 when somebody jacks my taxes up outside this business plan I'm working from. And we did pass, as you may have noticed, right-to-work legislation. First northern state to do so, really, since the Taft-Hartley Act, and already having a profound effect, business after business after business, citing this as a reason they're choosing Indiana or now looking at Indiana. And what's that really about? It resolves another uncertainty, to at least a large extent, that if you don't think your business is best served by a unionized environment, you're not going to be forced into it. Now, let me just say a few words about what sound policy as we see it isn't, because I see a lot of it practiced. If it's just sort of metaphorically again, if we think it's about the sandbox, it's not about the bowl of candy that you set out and hope that the kids down the block will come play with you. That is to say, it's not about goodies and front-end incentives. And I see a lot of, I think, poor judgment being practiced in this area, and it's bipartisan, by the way. Now, here in Illinois, just to take an extreme case, you've got yourself in a very bad situation. Because, as we've all read, you began offering subsidies to companies not to expand, or not to move here, but just to stay here. Sometimes with no guarantee even that the employment won't shrink. So I read about, this is Motorola and Navistar and Sears, and when we had some direct visibility into CME, and it's like $500 million, if I read the clippings right. But one step short of that, there's still some beggar thy neighbor practices going on state by state that I think deserve to be challenged. You know, it's a very dangerous thing to give a politician a checkbook marked economic development. All the incentives are wrong. The politician's incentive is to cut ribbons and issue press releases. And it's pretty easy for some folks to do if you know that the bill is coming due on the next person's watch. So from the get-go, we have looked at this very, very differently. We have always viewed incentives, first of all, as the cherries, not the sundae. We think we know that it's about, once again, I'm mixing metaphors wildly, it's about the sandbox. It's about the underlying environment. Somebody who's going to make a 20-year, 30-year investment is looking at a long horizon, and sure, they may be interested in some front-end assistance, fair enough to ask, but that's going to come and go in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years or something. What'll endure is tax rates and workers' comp rates and regulatory climate and litigation climate, and that's what's in that business plan. And so 2 days from now, I will chair. It's another one of those things we did on day one. We have a little different engine for seeking new investment in our state. It's a public-private corporation, and I made the governor the chair of it to remind future governors what the real job one was. So, quarterly board meeting 2 days from now. The second slide the board sees, the first one will show new job commitments in the last quarter. But the second one will show subsidy dollars, incentive dollars per job. The staff's assignment is to drive that number down as far as possible. As best we could reconstruct the records, when we got there, Indiana, when it engaged in this at all, was handing out about $36,000 per job. It's now between $8,000 and $9,000, and it got there pretty quickly because we simply recognized that this is the public's money we're playing with, and that it is not really the currency of business decision-making. It is very routine. It has been really the rule, not the exception, that some other state is outbidding us on front-end goodies, but we're winning the business simply by recognizing the way the business, of course, thinks about these things. Our incentives, our subsidies are all conditional, or as we sometimes say, performance-based. No front-end money. I've seen, these are friends and allies of mine, I've seen places like Georgia, South Carolina, Texas for sure, Louisiana, handing out cash to big companies with no assurance that the company will deliver. In our case, nobody gets, the tax reduction, the temporary tax reduction, doesn't happen until somebody gets hired and it's all validated. And if you fall short later on or retrench later on, then we go claw the money back. So we think this is, first of all, the only responsible way to approach the transactional side of economic development, but also, if you get the fundamentals right, a perfectly sound way to win much more than your share. Last point. I just said that I made whoever's governor the chairman of our Economic Development Corporation board. The general principle extends. I have said to my coworkers from the outset that attracting new jobs and growth and hope and income to our state is the central organizing purpose of our administration. Everything else is a means to that end, and that includes fiscal integrity and so forth. And that means it's everybody's job. And we have tried to align, as a good business would, align the entire administration toward that objective and measure groups and individuals on how well they did their part and reward them accordingly. Over and over we ask, what can you and your co-workers do better, do faster, or stop doing to make it more likely the next investment and job happens here? And so I got 100 great examples. I love the ones, though, where someone in an unlikely place remembered that and acted on it. Of the 1,200, I guess, transactions we've done in that little outfit I'm talking about in these years, the single biggest one in terms of payroll is the world's most high-tech mail-order pharmacy. Came to our state about 4 or 5 years ago. When I asked them later, as I always do, what did we do well, what could we do better, what mattered, a decisive factor, they said, well, your board of pharmacy. I said, what'd they do? He said, well, we got down to 2 states. We need 70-odd licenses to serve the whole country or internationally. I don't know who they're serving out of there. Complicated stuff. He said the other states said, well, our board meets quarterly and the next agenda's full, but we can probably get you on the agenda after that, and if all goes well, 4 or 5 months, we'll have you all set to go. They said, your board of pharmacy convened an emergency meeting in 3 days later, and the day after that, we had all our licenses. I went and gave some hugs and high fives to some people for that. And just the other day, I don't think this is too out of school, we've got a big procurement, and ours are big because we centralized all that stuff, for, I guess it's printers. And the CEO of the company, a name you all know very, very well, it's a big enough deal that the CEO called our head of administration to argue for their selection. And he was alert enough, having sat in the last cabinet meeting. By the way, we don't have a lot of them, but when we have a cabinet meeting, I sit the jobs person right next to me to remind everybody what counts most. That's always the first report. And the implicit message is if anybody's got something, if environmental, transportation, Department of Natural Resources, if anybody's got something they can contribute to a successful outcome on one of these deals, it's supposed to be on the top of their inbox. And this guy was alert enough after listening to the pleas to say, oh, by the way, how we doing on that printer plant you've been thinking about putting in Indiana? And that's what we're trying to. He got a call too from me. So this is the way we look at it. It's all about creating an environment that takes down obstacles, takes time and cost and hassle out of the system. Only at the margin is it about inducements and incentives that might make a very, very close call come our way. And from an Indiana standpoint, it will not be about short-term, short-sighted, reckless use of public resources in a way that's not really value-added in the end. Nothing would help any of our states, whatever policies they practice, obviously more than an economy that grows at 4%, which the Bush Institute has wisely charted a path to. It would solve a lot of problems. I can't wait for it to come back. Byron mentioned, Indiana is now at or near the top of every single ranking of business attractiveness. CEOs, real estate advisors, site selectors, it doesn't matter who does it. It's us and some little selection of usually Sun Belt states. But it's very frustrating right now. I always tell everybody it's like being the prettiest girl in school and they called off the prom. But sooner or later, we'll have sensible economic policy at the national level, the music will start, and we think Indiana will do a lot of dancing when it does. Thank you for having me here.
So the governor will take a few questions. Please just raise your hand. Yes.
When I hear stories of how you were able to balance the budget and create jobs and lower debt, all by lowering taxes, some people in this city, when you tell people you lower taxes, oh, they must think that puppies are dying and children are crying and birds aren't flying and the sun isn't rising. And so I was just wondering if you could, speak about when I'm having these debates with these people, if you could speak about, what is the health of Indiana's social safety nets? Are there more or less people on welfare? What have been some of the other results of it?
I'm going to tell you, but I think I can back it up, that services have never been better in our state. This is another one of those things that's not necessary to be too complex about. We slowed the rate of growth rate of spending, compound growth rate of spending now for our 8 years is 1.43%, right around half the rate of inflation. We did not have ever really vigorous revenue growth the way a few lucky states, energy states, and some did. And of course, we had the same collapse in revenues that most states did when it all hit the fan in 7 and 8 and 9. So we did it on the spending side. To an extent, we did it by, I could bore you all afternoon with examples of ways in which we made the same dollars go further. I mentioned consolidated procurement, for instance. Huge money in that. Once you call in the credit cards and don't let every department buy everything in onesies and twosies, and from Uncle Harry or that salesman with the nice smile. But a lot of that. We consolidate. Here's a good example. We're getting national awards for improving what might have been the worst child protection system in America, now viewed as a model. The Annie Casey Foundation, which is pretty much the arbiters of this, has Indiana as their case study. Now, as it happens, we're spending a ton less money. Why? We have 92 counties. We had 92 child protection systems 8 years ago. Every local judge was doing it his way. You wouldn't believe what some of the stuff was going on. We were paying 4 times as much for the same service in adjacent counties, sometimes to the same provider. We had judges sending kids off to places in like the Dominican Republic. They may have been, something good may have been happening when they got there, but not clear, and it sure was expensive. And we invested in that system even when we were cutting other things. But when we reformed the system on a net basis, all the measures of effectiveness are up. We had the fewest child fatalities among children known to the state to be at risk last year in state history. And yet it cost a whole lot less money. So some people say, well, you spent less money, you must not care. And we say, no, there's nothing we care more about. And we think we got a better system. So I could give you a lot of other examples. Our Bureau of Motor Vehicles we worked on from the very beginning. Jimmy John would have been, if he was available, he'd have been our choice to run it, because we looked at it, we said, what we got there is 170 Dairy Queens. And is Illinois any different than most places? Do you hate your Bureau of Motor Vehicles? Most people? Okay, so nobody hated it more than Hoosiers did. I used to say that people went to the Indiana BMV with a box lunch and a copy of War and Peace and hoped not to finish both before someone noticed they were in there. So if you went last month, the total visit time from the time the greeter, sort of Walmart style, said, welcome, Mr. Glassman, what are you here for, and directed you to the right line, until your transaction cleared the computer was 8 minutes and 34 seconds. Now, that system cost a lot less money than it used to, and there's a whole story in there too. But, the point is, first of all, a better government, like better business, can often be can be less expensive to produce because it's more productive. And then, more fundamentally, I always say, you'd just be amazed how much government you'd never miss.
One other question. Yes.
Well, no, we haven't stopped working. We still got things we're not satisfied about, and you're never going to run out of things to work on. And the answer is no, but. Number one, some case studies have been done. One is being done at IU on the BMV that I just talked about. It's a great little business case study. It happens to be government, but that's incidental to the sorts of, so our mistakes are in there and the improvements are in there. There are a couple of general ones. One's been done at Princeton that's sort of like, I don't know what it's going to look like, but it apparently heads the direction you're talking about. It's a broader look at various reforms and particularly service and process improvements. And then there's a third at the Harvard Business School. And again, I don't know exactly what the content of those will be, but there will be some of that around. I did write a book. I didn't want it to be much about Indiana, but the publisher kept asking for a little more, and so I tried to integrate a lot of the stories, including a couple that I told here, and many more are in that book. That was a pretty deft little commercial, don't you think?
Right.
And other than that, we'll have to leave it to the journalists or some historian somewhere.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thanks.
By the way, Just want to thank the governor, and also many of us were disappointed that you did not decide to run for president, but you certainly did a great job in Indiana, and I hope that you will go out and fix higher education as well. And it's an excellent book. Let me just say a few words in closing. You know, we learned at the Bush Institute from our founder and inspiration that we begin with a goal, and the goal is 4% growth. And growth is what gives us prosperity and opportunity. So we focus on growth. And how do you get growth? Well, as Brian Westbury says, policy counts. And as David Booth said, incentives count. That's the University of Chicago way. So just a few points. I think Governor Daniels couldn't have said it better. It's the point that Amity made in her op-ed today, that in the conflict between deal-making and prices, which is to say consistency and certainty, or as the governor said, being quick, consistent, collaborative, that's what counts. That's what counts. Ultimately, people want to move their business to a state where they've got that kind of environment. Second, regulation really counts. We don't want to forget that even at a tax conference. Third, taxes are where the leverage is. I mean, ultimately, what this country needs is more and more tax competition. We've been talking about the states and the state of Illinois, but you know, ultimately America is made up of states. And when states get it right, which I think more and more they are, then America benefits at the federal level. Just a word on Illinois. Gotten a little beaten up here today. Brian Westbury used the term death spiral. On the other hand, things may be so bad that something good is about to happen. Jimmy John talked about learning from pain, and I think that's a really good point. Bruce Rauner said things have gotten so bad that people are ready to revolt, that they are on the brink of change. And we've seen in other states, like Indiana, like Kansas, like Oklahoma, states in the Midwest, that things are changing and that things can change in Illinois as well. And I think that's a good message to end things on. I want to just thank, as I usually say, events like this look easy, but in fact, there's some people work really hard to make them work. And Kristen King, who heads our events department, does a terrific job all the time, and Andrea Weil, who headed up this particular event, did a fabulous job. I also, just on a point of personal privilege, I would just like to say that I was extremely pleased that my wife Beth was here for the first time, I think, in a year at a Bush Institute event, as much as she would have liked to have attended some of the early ones. I also want to thank our moderators, John Tillman, Margaret Spellings, Dan Propp. Wow, they did a great job. I mean, it's very clear, but we take moderating seriously at the Bush Institute. We got like a whole pamphlet, but with these guys, we didn't have to do that. Moderators are really what make an event like this go. And then finally, I just want to thank Amity Schlaze, the director of the 4% Growth Project, and her team, Mike McMahon and Matt Denhart. And I want to thank the entire audience, which has been tremendously filled with energy and has, you know, when you get right down to it, you don't have a good conference unless you've got a great audience, and you have been. So thank you all, and please pick up a book on the way out.
Trusting Americans. Last week, I had the privilege of hosting my firm's first global summit for family-controlled businesses around the world. And one of our sessions was John Huey, the author of the biography of Sam Walton, and Walter Isaacson, the author of the biography of Stephen Jobs. And they compared and contrasted the different men who are completely different from a personal standpoint, but the similar characteristics of leadership and why they were so great. And many of the common characteristics, I'm sure many of you are familiar with: passion, vision, integrity, fortitude, setting high expectations for themselves and those around them, never accepting no as the answer, having the courage to go against conventional wisdom when necessary, and getting a little bit of enjoyment from defying the odds.
Piece of the conversation on policy for the long term based down in Texas, representing the values that we talked about today at this conference. And I want to thank the sponsors of this conference today, Highland Capital Management, First Trust, and the Illinois Policy Institute that helped make this happen. And I want to introduce the fourth sponsor of the conference today, Byron D. Trott. He's chairman and CEO of BDT Capital Partners, which is a Chicago-based merchant bank that invests in businesses, family-owned businesses, and provides advisory services to them. And I want you to know that the Bush Institute is a family-founded business, and Byron Trott, we're happy to report, has provided us capital, is an investor, and gives us good advice. So I invite to the podium Byron Trott. My name is Mark Langdell. I'm president of the George Bush Foundation. 5 years ago, President Bush asked me to stand up the George W. Bush Foundation, and I want to give you a brief report on where we are. We have a 25-acre site on the campus of Southern Methodist University, an up-and-coming national university in Dallas, Texas, where we're building the George W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum. It'll be the 13th Presidential Library and Museum in the NARA system. On April 25th of 2013, we'll dedicate this building that will house all the records of the two-term Bush presidency and a museum that will tell the story of the consequential 8 years when he was our leader in the format of decisions, key decisions that he made based upon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. I just say what a great set of discussions we had this morning, and while a little depressing for us in the state of Illinois, I believe it was enlightening nonetheless. Just wanted to give a quick hand to James, Amity, Mark, and the Bush Institute for all their terrific work on tax and growth. I think everybody was paying attention this morning, but that's less tax and more growth, not the reverse. Today I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Mitch Daniels, the 49th governor of Indiana and the author of the best-selling book, Keeping the Republic, Saving America by...
...upon the principles that guide the work of the Bush Institute. Because we added to the Presidential Library Museum something unique, which is a policy institute, the George W. Bush Institute, which James Glassman has started up in tremendous fashion. And we're doing work in the areas that he described this morning, including the conference that we're having today. And it's going really well. We published a book in July, The 4% Solution, a copy of which is available to all of you who attended here today. So as you leave, don't forget to get your copy of the book. We've been raising money. I'm happy to say that we have raised enough money to pay for the building, to pay for the startup of the Institute, but we're also continuing to ask people to help us fund the work of the Institute, because it's our hope and President Bush's goal that 20 years from now that the Bush Institute will be a key